The scope of this video is to show some of the variations and details of telephone collecting. The video is aimed for new collectors to the hobby. There are literally thousands of different models and types of telephones. There's many different manufacturers. I will be concentrating on the North American telephones that's found in the US and Canada. There were 4 major manufacturers up to the breakup of the Bell system: WesternElectric, ITT, Stromberg Carlson, Automatic Electric, and then the 5th would have been Northern Electric of Canada. Northern Electric at one time was minority owned by AT&T, which owned controlling interest in Western Electric here in the US. The telephones you're looking at is a multitude of phones from all of the manufacturers. I'm not an Automatic Electric person, so I do not have very many AE phones, and I have not yet set up my AE phone display, which will have around 30 to 50 phones in it. Presently, we're looking at the North American phones for the colors and the model. The telephone collecting hobby can cover a wide facet of things, from residential phones to business telephones to the advertising memorabilia and attachments that attach to the telephones, as well as some people are into the outside plant, as well as the central office switching. I will only be discussing the telephones, and there will not be any real detail from how they work electrically. Only some of the things that people look for that makes a phone more valuable. None of these phones are manufactured today. There is a company that imports telephones that look like ITT Western Electric 2500s. They still do import them. They're a very inexpensive, aka cheap phone. Real telephone collectors do not collect Conair, cordless phones, or any of the novelty Garfield phones and that. That stuff was mostly post-divestiture, cheap consumer-grade junk. Some people may have a favorite phone, such as a Garfield phone or something like that, and that's perfectly fine. But the main telephone collectors stick with the traditional type telephones that was used prior to 1984. I will move the camera and show some of the differences in the phones, and then after I'm finished in my single line phone room, I will show a few business phones for those who may collect the business phone type technology. We're looking at a Seafoam Green ITT/Kellogg 500 set. You'll notice on the dial there are no letters. If you was to look at the telephone next to it, we have letters by the numbers. The Seafoam Green telephone was, in this particular case, used on an intra-office telephone system, such as a Kmart store could have had these, or other businesses. Generally, they did not have the Seafoam Green, but this dial ring was used on what's called a PAX, Private Automatic Exchange. The telephone that we're looking at now is what is called a Rose Beige 500 set. That is a early telephone set of the 60s. and it was a Western Electric set. These phones are quite rare in color, and it has a super fat cord, handset cord. It would have a very fat mounting cord, which I will show a mounting cord in the future. So these phones are more desirable if you're looking to collect very early Type 500 sets. We have here an ivory 501 set that's equivalent to the 500, other than the 501 was set up for multi-party ringing, which is accomplished by moving a wire from one terminal to another. The cord on this phone, handset cord, is not the original. On many old phones, you'll find the cords are stretched, cracked, sometimes cut off, and they need replaced. Finding a fat cord similar to the rose beige is nearly impossible. But if you're persistent, they do exist in the world. These are very desirable touch-tone phones. And again, this is, I believe, a seafoam green 1500. It does not have the star and the pound. When the DTMF telephones were first produced in 63, 64 as early trials, then later on production, there was no need for the star and the pound because it did not do anything. These dials only lasted 2 to 4 years before they were replaced with the 12-button traditional dials that we see today. So the 1500 series phones are definitely collectible, and they do exist, but they're fairly expensive. I have an ivory phone that is a Western Electric. We have a blue 1500 and a pink. They made these in about 11 different colors. This is a gray 2500 style phone. I believe this is a 2515. The unique thing about this, other than being gray, which generally when you found these in the Bell telephone system, they were connected to computers, modems, referred to as the data phone series. On the left side of where the handset hangs up, you'll notice here that there's a white plunger. This plunger, it has the ability, if it has the mechanism inside the phone, for exclusion or data transfer, depending on how it's wired. This is not common on most telephones, so if you find a phone with the exclusion plunger, and there's different names for it, if it stays up when you pull it up, then the phone has the necessary mechanism inside of it. These were typically found in business applications. And this telephone, of course, has got the 12-button touch-tone pad with the star and the pound. The black telephone has a turnkey here. This telephone has on the rear of it, and I will show that briefly, a headset jack. So you can plug in a headset, such as a 52 type headset or a Plantronics headset, and then remove the, or you can leave the receiver on hook, operate the turnkey, and that'll transfer the phone between the handset and the headset. These were used mostly in business applications. You have the telephone jack on the left and then the two holes on the right, which is where the headset would plug in. The green telephone and the red telephone are shaped slightly different, but they were designed after the 500 type design. And those telephones were made by Stromberg Carlson, and the plastic kits were the new image kits to take an older style phone and make it look modern, which there was a great demand for when the 500 set was released. I also have here an ITT 500 set that has a message waiting lamp. Typically, these phones were used in the hotel motel industry. So if someone called and you were not in your room, they could leave a message at the reception desk or operator, and then they would turn on a button and it would light the light, letting you know there was a message. The light also lights up during the ringing. This is a Western Electric model 2500, and this is a clear housing on a phone. These phones are incredibly rare and incredibly expensive if they are actually Western Electric housings. The phone must have engraved in it, in the handset or the back of the phone, Bell System property not for sale, made by Western Electric, or simply Western Electric. They made these in trim lines, 500s, rotary dial phones, and I believe in some wall phones. These phones are again incredibly rare and very expensive if you can find them. The black phone is a Model 500, and it does not have a rotary dial. This is what would be referred to as a manual set. These telephone sets were used on manual non-dial exchanges, used in areas that the public had access to, that they did not want the phones to be used for outgoing calls but incoming only. These phones are fairly common with without the dial in it. It's a fully functional phone other than you're unable to place an outgoing call from the phone. The black wall phone is an early Western Electric 554. This telephone has a straight handset cord, which is a rubber cord, or could possibly be a cloth cord. Typically in their day they were rubber. And the hook switch assembly, which is here, is much larger and generally not as bright and shiny as the switch hooks on the later generation phones. So this phone is a fairly desirable phone for those reasons. The orange phone and the lime green phone are very collectible. The orange was made by ITT or Stromberg. The lime green was also made by ITT and Stromberg. The Western Electric did not make phones in orange or green of this style. There has been stories circulating that there was a certain hotel chain that had some Western Electric phones in the bright orange. I've never seen it. And if they are truly engraved or has molded into the housing Bell System made by Western Electric, they would be an extremely desirable phone for most collectors. I will make a quick pan of the various types of telephones I have here, only to show the different colors, and these were made by different manufacturers, all off of the Western Electric patent. They licensed this model of phone to various manufacturers to be produced for the U.S. market and Canada. The Bell System did not make a 3554 such as the three phones we're looking at, the ash, baby blue, and the lime green. Those were ITT, Stromberg, or Northern Electric phones. This is how they recycled the old rotary phones and made them more desirable by converting them to touchtone. The Bell System did not do that. So these phones, again, to the right person, would be somewhat collectible. The most valuable is the lime green. I have here a multitude of trim line telephones, various ages and manufacturers. The pink telephone, which is the fourth one over at the end next to the switchboard, that one, and as well as the one on the shelf below, was made for a limited time of probably 6 or 8 years. Then they discontinued pink. These other colors were gold, which was used by the independent telephone companies, moss green by everybody, and again the lime green, and then the burnt orange, which was the Bell system color. It's a more dull color. I will show some of the the differences on the dials. The telephone on the left is a Western Electric, and it is a turquoise. That was a limited time color as well. Then the telephone over on the right was a blue, and that was a produced by everybody. This is a pink Western Electric 12 button. They also made these telephones in 10 buttons that did not have the star and the pound. If you ever find one of those, buy it, because they are just ultra rare and very valuable. Another thing to look for on the telephones is the very early phones had operators spelled out on the touchtone pad where the 0 is. This was replaced by a just simple OPER if it was used here in the United States. If the phone was used in Canada, depending on the province, it may just have a 0 only without the operator. Here is a telephone that was made for the Canadian use. Some parts of Canada is English and some parts of it is French. This phone was intended to be used in either part. Also, if you notice that the gray is a much darker gray than the other telephones. This is a trademark of Northern Telecom. This is a Western Electric 500 PU. This telephone is incredibly valuable and rare. It has a lamp so that in the on-hook or off-hook condition it lights the dial. And you can adjust the brightness, intensity of the lamp with the turn key. When you go off hook, the lamp dims. When it's on hook, it's a little brighter. They had various models of this, which had slight differences, but these phones are very collectible, and they again had them in most all colors. The big issue is almost all of them is missing the cap, so you have to find a reproduction cap, and those are generally very limited in availability and color. I'll show a few of the North Electric Erica phones. These were used in the United States, but they were not that successful. This was made by a company in Galion, Ohio, which was later taken over by Automatic Electric. These phones do exist, and they are valuable depending on the condition and the color. Here are some Stromberg Carlson swirl phones. The actual housing of the phones had a mixture of different colors of plastics, light, dark, and white. They made these in, to the best of my knowledge, 5 different colors. These are not very common, and they're fairly collectible. This is just some of my collection to show the different types of telephones and some of the different manufacturers of telephones. There are literally just thousands of phones that were made when it comes to models, different styles, and some of them had different functionality depending on the phone and the intended use. This is a Kellogg red bar, and you can tell because it has a red bar for the switch hook. Some people collect these. They're a nice phone. They work well after they're rebuilt generally. A Western Electric 354. This is some of the very, very early attempt at color for phones. There was 5 or 6 colors made, and these phones have got one serious flaw. The material that they were made out of is drying out and shrinking, and they're virtually impossible to take apart without cracking and it's virtually impossible to find a phone that has not yet cracked. These are valuable and highly sought after. This is an ivory phone. Here's some of the Candlestick phones. You have the Candlestick phones that were manual exchanges. There was no provision for dialing. The operator switched all of the calls. And then you had other Candlesticks that did have dials on it. And it's very common to find these without the dial in them because they had dial blanks and was used in the manual exchanges. We have several of the desk mount phones. These were 30s, 40s, and very early 50s. And again, with and without the dial. The Candlestick phones, of course, go back to the 20s. And there are ones that are definitely older than that, but now you're getting into some serious, serious money the older the phone is. The telephone on the left is an apartment phone. It has a switch to switch between the telephone line and the intercom, and there are buttons that you could unlock the front door. These were common in the eastern part of the United States. And of course the 3-slot payphone, and there's unbelievable amount of them in the world. They're almost all basket cases, and there was a multitude of model numbers designed for different applications. And then you had the wood telephones. These phones can go back to the turn of the century early. The particular phones that we're looking at is around 1900 to the zeros. And then, of course, as the rotary dials, the dial systems became available, they modernized the phone and put dials on. The phone we're looking at, commonly referred to as a donut phone by the collectors, that has a very expensive receiver because the terminals are on the top outside, which is called an outside terminal receiver. Has, of course, the transmitter and the spit cup on the front of it. Then, of course, there is a wooden box that has the network, or in this case the induction coil and the ringer. This telephone would have been used on a manual exchange. Then we have a payphone that is got a receiver transmitter, and it would have been used on a manual exchange. Then we have the different phones, different time periods, as well as an intercom phone, and then phones that were later into the production and the 40s and 50s. Here is a manual exchange. I did a video of this evolution of the 100-year phone call. I'll try to put a link below. This has many manual telephones on it, so every call was completed by the operator. The only thing I have not done is created the wood sides for this. But this is another facet of telephone collecting, is some of the auxiliary equipment. This is a magneto switchboard, which would have been used with the wooden phones and some of the metal phones that had subsets with magnetos in it. This switchboard was produced sometime in the early 1900s up to possibly 1912 and so forth. We're looking at some of the 1654 telephones. These were produced by Stromberg Carlson. They were licensed off of a WesternElectric patent, but WesternElectric never produced this phone in rotary dial. They only produced the 2554s or the 1554s, which had a 10-button touch-tone pad without the star and the pound. Again, the lime green and the bright orange, the gray, and other colors. These phones are somewhat desirable to some collectors. Below are the Princess telephones, both touch-tone and rotary, modular and non-modular, in various colors. And again, they made them in 10-button and then later on the 12-button. These particular telephones have a touch-tone pad that is translucent, and there's a light bulb in the bottom of the phone that lights up the dial for dialing at night. Here are some of the 400 series business telephones that was manufactured. Western Electric, Northern Electric, and ITT. Stromberg did make phones, but I don't have any of those out. These are far more complex and require back-end equipment to make the phones work as a business phone. These could all function as a single line phone without any problems. And just briefly, a few of my payphones. This is a small collection of them. Different colors, styles, models, and so forth. The telephone here on the left side is an incredibly rare and very valuable phone because it's got a 10-button touch-tone pad, and that is a Western Electric phone, and there were very few of them actually produced. Here are some of the telephones with their covers removed or some of the parts to show the insides of the phones. There's also chimes, ringers, different bells, handsets, and then different ringer boxes for phones that did not have ringers inside of them. And up high is some of the different items you would find that was used in the telephone industry. Most of the stuff up high is not collectible, but some people have a few pieces just to show. Most of it's lightning protectors, interface boxes, ringers, jacks, and so forth. Down below here is some of the more modern business telephone systems made prior to divestiture. And there are people who collect these kinds of phones. I also have phone booths and payphones in them. These are the more modern phones, and I'll show some of those later on in the video in my other display room. Here are a few more of my payphones. This does not encompass all payphones. And again, this is only for showing the different types of variations that a person could collect of telephones in general. Quick overview of my business telephones. Most of what you see are Western Electric, some ITT, some Stromberg, but the majority of the phones in this room was made by Western Electric, used here in the United States. This is just an overview. I do have a video that shows my 1A2 display phones. This again is just to show the variations that you could collect if you were interested in business telephones. Here is a close-up of some of the phones. These are 30-button phones, 1A2. These are very, very sought after and are very expensive. And I have them in all of the colors. Some of them are original plastic mold, some of them are painted. Here are some of the 18-button phones. And the gray phone is a data phone. We have 20-button phones in both touch-tone and rotary. And then here I have an ITT, a Stromberg Carlson, another Stromberg, all the way down, which black one is also Stromberg. And then I have a Western Electric, blue and beige. And then in the 10-button series, we have an ITT with a call announcer, and then Western and ITT type 10-button 2830 model phones. They made these also in rotary dial, which I do not have very many of them, but they did exist in rotary. And then the wall phones, which are 2852s and 2852s. And in the next video, I will describe some of the numbering so people can have an idea how they numbered some of these phones. And a lot of the numbers are very common amongst manufacturers. And these wall phones are highly sought after and fairly expensive. And here's the inside of some of the phones with the shells removed. The telephones that you saw are connected to my switching system. I have multiple switching systems. This particular one is the number 3 crossbar. I'll show a step-by-step This video is not intended to go into detail on the switching side of things. This is for people with much more advanced technical skills and desires. A picture of a step-by-step. This is some of the equipment used to make the business telephones that you just seen operational. This video was just a very brief overview of telephones. I will discuss more details of telephones on the next presentation. I do not intend on covering exact specific details on how to repair every single little thing that could go wrong with the phone, because there's just literally thousands of phones out there, and I would not live long enough to do that. I would just provide some basics on how things work and simple things to do on the telephone. There are 2 telephone clubs in the United States. The Antique Telephone Collectors Association, which primarily deals with magneto phones and very early phones from the 40s back to the turn of the century. And you have the Telephone Collectors International, that is more modern telephones from the 40s on up till divestiture, as well as the business telephone systems and the central office stuff. The end of this presentation.